In 2014, an estimated 2 billion adults lacked access to a transactional account and were excluded to the formal financial system, what we often refer to as the unbanked market. So in response, the World Bank Group set an ambitious target to achieve what they term as universal financial access. And this universal financial access envisaged that by 2020, adults globally will be able to have access to transaction accounts or electronic forms of payments to store money, send and receive payments. And it actually is it's a first step towards a broader financial inclusion, where individuals and firms can actually safely use a whole range of appropriate financial services, including savings, payments, credit cards, and insurance. So today, we'll be talking to two entrepreneurs on the new businesses they have created impacting financial inclusion in developing markets. Hello, welcome to LATOKEN VCTV. I'm Vijay Tirathrai, your host for Founders Insight. So let's begin. The government of India has made a major push to EV led by public transportation and is working towards mobility in terms of a shared, connected, and electric as a theme. They envisage that 100% of electrical vehicles will be on the roads by the year 2030, a pretty ambitious goal. And it's a major push towards EV led by public transportation, including fleet buses, taxis, two-wheelers, and including three-wheelers. So to learn more about the future of mobility in India and the impact it's making to the environment, but also to the welfare of drivers, let's take a listen to Cedric Tendon, who will be speaking to us on his new venture. Cedric, welcome. Cedric is an impact entrepreneur on a mission to reduce poverty and pollution through green energy and smart financial modeling and the use of data analytics. He has a master's in information and systems management from France. Cedric, welcome to the show. There's a lot to unpack here. And I know your business is not easy to understand. So help us understand and unpack what exactly is the business model of Three Wheels United.
Thank you, Vijay. Three Wheels United at its core is a fintech lender. We use technology to provide flexible and financial products to individuals who want to own a light electric vehicle. These are individuals who otherwise would not have access to capital. But we're more than just a lender. We have a platform that removes the risk around driving electric vehicles for these first-time users. We have a community of over 40,000 drivers who at some point would want to convert their vehicles to electric. We provide them loans that covers the full asset cost or rent-to-own options for drivers who cannot afford a down payment. We partner with manufacturers of these vehicles to guarantee that the vehicles are always going to be on road. And when they are not on road, these drivers are compensated. Through our mobile app, we show drivers where the charging points, and we also allow them to raise any incident that would be obstructing them from making these vehicles work seamlessly. Finally, we connect them to ride-hailing companies who guarantee a minimum income for these vehicles. All of this is just so that the driver can drive his vehicle seamlessly. This makes the EV experience for a driver who traditionally is used to drive non-EV vehicle easy to adopt an electric vehicle. We've done this for close to 4,000 drivers. We have the partnerships working, and we're raising capital to scale it to 10,000 vehicles.
So here's what I took away from that. So number one, essentially, you are electrifying all the three wheels vehicles, right? Second is if I can use the phrase, Uberizing the experience for the consumer. On an app, they can actually call for a ride-hailing opportunity. Third, you're also actually, because of your interesting financial model, you are able to give lower costs of financing to the drivers, which in fact, rather than renting, they can actually own those vehicles. That's generally what I think Three Wheels United is trying to do. But
you're completely right.
If that's the case, in the nutshell, how big is this market that you're addressing? for the three-wheelers in a country like India?
To talk about the market, we believe at this stage that the total cost of ownership already makes sense for light EVs. So we're talking 2 and 3 wheelers. We're starting with the 3 wheelers, both passenger and cargo segments. In the future, we plan to extend it to 2 wheelers. I'll talk specifically about the 3 wheeler market. So this is a market where you have 7 million vehicles on Indian roads. With a replacement market annually of about 500,000. We're talking here of an opportunity of $1 billion annually. And that is just that market, Vijay.
Okay, so let me understand more insights around the EV opportunity in India. The government stated that 100% of the vehicles would be electrified by the year 2030. That seems pretty ambitious to me. Firstly, what's your realistic estimation or what we can anticipate, and more specifically, what you anticipate to be the key changes in this coming decade?
Well, there are a lot of factors that are in favor of this number. Of course, governments have to be overly ambitious to earn somewhere around the target. So I think 30%, 40% of the market converting to EVs in 10 years is not unrealistic for a government like India, which is really pro and pushing all of its EV policies, right? Key trends we expect in this market. So if you look at the prices of non-electric vehicles, they're going up because the quality standards are increasing. So the price comparison between EVs and non-EVs are getting very close. Then you have the battery price, which is dropping quite substantially. So you would expect the vehicle cost over a period of time to reduce and the technology to even get better, right? Then there are all of the subsidies and programs which the government has put behind it. So tax credits, deregulating it, providing subsidies directly to drivers as well as manufacturers, incentivizing local manufacturing of these vehicles. All of this would drive this this ambition of getting 20 to 30% of the market electric vehicles. I do believe that they could achieve it.
That's truly exciting, I think, for both the industry as well as for the consumers to look forward to a much cleaner modes of transportation across the country. I'm particularly intrigued by the social impact that you're making. And we spoke about financial inclusion earlier, which you proclaim to be a cornerstone of your business model. What does that mean? And what is the impact that you're really making? Walk us through use cases to what Three Wheels United is impacting the livelihoods of people in India.
Thanks, Vijay. That question really sits at the core of our mission, right? And I think it also drives the economic argument behind shifting to electric. For a driver, there is no sense moving to electric if it doesn't mean more money in his pockets or to his family. If you look at the landscape we're dealing with, 50% of drivers don't already have access to, 90% of drivers don't have access to capital to buy their vehicles. 50% of these drivers are renting. So you have another set of 50% who would get money from some source at very exorbitant rates. What Three Wheels is doing for these drivers is, one, giving access to every driver to have capital to buy and own an asset. There is financial implications, positive financial implications for that driver. One, they don't have to rent anymore, so they more than double their income just by driving and repaying a loan. And once they have completed their loan cycle, there is even more money in their pocket. Secondly, by owning the asset, it gives them, one, a credit history which they don't have, an active bank account or participating in the banking sector, which is required for or prerequisite for getting any additional loans or other financial products. And then third, they have access to things like life insurance, vehicle insurance, which will come to them as the first-time user. In all, these drivers are getting more money in their hands, but not just that, they're also building a more positive financial history.
And also, if I can add to that, lifting out of that poverty cycle where they're only dependent on, rent seekers and other middlemen that's exploiting society, so to speak. Cedric, in closing, what intrigues me is your background, right? You are a French national with an African heritage, landing up in Bangalore and doing business in India. Why the heck would you do that? And more specifically, what are as a founder, what are the key lessons you've learned and that you can share to foreign entrepreneurs who are seeking or trying to do the same, coming to India to start up a business?
Well, Vijay, I'm a core believer of we go where our minds take us. We are driven by our passion and the things we want to do. And then of course, there is challenges in every market. India is just like any other market. But what I particularly see is the opportunity. I go where there is an opportunity and I try to make the best of it. You have to identify your strengths, and part of not being and part of being a foreigner could be a strength and a weakness. So you have to identify your strengths, double down on your strengths and your weaknesses. Make sure that you're covering your backside for those, and that's it.
Well said. Well said. Cedric, it's always a pleasure to have you, and thank you for being joining on this show today and Founders Insight. Wish you all the very success.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you, Vijay, for having me.
That was Cedric Tandong, Chief Executive Officer of Three Wheels United. Just last week, I was absolutely delighted that my son graduated from the American University in Washington, D.C. with a finance degree. And as a parent, while I have such joy seeing my son going through such an achievement, I have to endure ridiculous banking charges for cross-border transfers over the past few years. And I'm sure many parents have gone through the similar experience. And this frustration actually has led me to invest in a startup called Pax Credit, which actually saves students money on cross-border tuition payments. So to speak more about this is Abhinav Balogoni, who is the first-time entrepreneur, who is the chief executive and the sole founder of Pax Credit, who started this business shortly after graduating with his master's business analytics degree from the Singapore Management University. Welcome, Abhinav. How are you doing?
Hi, Vijay. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So let's begin with Pax Credit. What exactly does it do, and how did you come up with the idea?
So in general, students somewhere about $500 to $1,200 on their program fees by using Pax Credit instead of local banks. And we facilitate this because we have a global payment network of pay-in and payout partners. So the funds transfer is cheaper and faster. And the thesis for Pax Credit has originated from my personal experience when I was moving from India to Singapore from a master's program at SMU.
So one would argue that you are essentially a remittance company, no different than, say, Western Union. But how would you compete with them, who have such a historical footprint and scale that's doing the same type of service seemingly? And what would you also say to the fact that in the recent pandemic, it's driven a lot of students away from physical, in-person tuition to online education. So can you speak to us on that front and clarify your positioning?
Certainly. So I think let's dig deeper on the problem you're trying to solve here. So the personal experience, what I told about is that not just the payments part, the international students are usually not given the credit products like credit card or lending products because their credit history is non-existent in the new country, despite being potentially big high credit-worthy borrowers back in their home countries. So it's just that the financial services aimed at this customer segment are not necessarily in line with the market offerings, and they have been underserved customer segments. So we are trying to solve for the life cycle of the international students rather than just the payments part of it. So our business model as such is different because we don't necessarily have to rely on the payment solution to make money because we are serving for the life cycle. That's a key differentiator. And one interesting thing is that because of the whole concept of open banking, now we could build these kind of a suite of financial services across geographies at a much lower cost, probably at a fraction of cost, like 1/10 of what it could have taken us if we had probably done this 8 to 10 years ago. So that's a key differentiator from all these services out there. Second part is with respect to the online delivery of classes or lectures. I mean, yes, I strongly believe the hybrid form of learning is here to stay. Despite that, that is actually a very good indicator of the market because that increases the access to education primarily across borders. So in a way, probably more international students would enroll with these universities. And since they are from different countries, they would certainly have to make these cross-border payments. So it's a healthy sign for our industry as well.
So let's to be clear, students studying abroad, how big is the market that you're addressing and where are these clients of yours coming from?
So if you look at the top 5 destination markets, the tuition fee spent in these top 5 destination markets is about $120 billion. And one of the services providers out there has stated that the international student lending market alone is $100 billion. Now, the majority of these international students originate from emerging markets, primarily in Asia and Africa, MENA region. And if you look at the specific countries, China, India, and Korea, 3 countries alone probably contribute to 2/3 of this market.
Right. You heard my grievance at the opening, and as a frustrated parent having to pay exorbitant fees, tell us what's the impact you are already making with students and their families right now.
So as we mentioned, the majority of the students originate from emerging markets, right? So when we look at this amount of savings they get by doing these kind of high ticket transfers, it's usually in the range of $500 to $1,200. Now, this amount of savings is significant for these families because these savings could cover the household expenses for months in the emerging markets. So effectively, we are giving back their money just by creating an efficient payment network. That's what we are doing. And the other interesting part is in majority of these emerging markets, this is probably the first time for these kind of adults to have a banking solution as well when they actually come into these destination markets. So that's another part where we are bringing in the people to the digital payments world as well.
I've been off in closing, you are a first-time solo founder, and how were you able to keep up this rapid growth just in the last 6 months?
So interestingly, I strongly believe that if I have to surround myself with people with complementary skill set and potentially who could help me handle this. So our early stage team members, along with the support of Techstars program, which we have been part of recently, that has been immensely helpful, primarily because during not just the MD and PM, also the associates become part of your team. So effectively, you have this 5 to 6 people extra set of hands helping you out. So I think that has been really helpful for us during this past few months.
I've been off. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. It's been a great pleasure to see you. I'm super excited for Pax Credit because the growth that you're experiencing is just phenomenal. And as we rebound from this post-pandemic world, I'm pretty confident that the flow of students will ever increase, historically speaking. Thank you, and hope to catch you at the next occasion. My next guest is a really special gentleman, and he is the co-founder of the Next Billion Ventures. He's also a network partner advisor at Silicon Valley's Village Global, which focuses on growth stage tech companies in rising markets outside China and India. For example, Southeast Asia, LATAM or Latin America, the Middle East. And some of the investments that he has made includes Vox Media, e-commerce enterprise Ibota, a ride-sharing company, Careem, which is world famous in Middle East. And he is also actively sits on several startup boards, including TapTap, which is also a global remittance company, ChargeHound, which is recently acquired by PayPal, and over 20 other investments from Jakarta to Cairo to Sao Paulo. He is also the best-selling author of Startup Rising, the Entrepreneurial Revolution, Remaking the Middle East, which captures the spirit of the entrepreneurship and fast-rising tech ecosystem in that part of the world. And Christopher, who's armed with an MBA from Harvard Business School, is also an extensive writer television, appears in several television appearances, speaking on the rise of global innovation and economics issues. Often you'll catch him in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, CNN, CNBC, Fox, and so on. I had the pleasure of meeting Christopher in Dubai several years ago, and we've become close friends. So I now welcome Christopher Schroeder of the Next Billion Ventures on the show. Christopher, welcome.
Great to be with you, and great to be with those two other rock stars, man. What awesome entrepreneurs, Vijay.
I can't tell you how much fun I'm having working with such entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure you too. Yeah. Firstly, it's incredibly early in Washington, D.C. right now, probably at 5 a.m. And I believe you must have had really 3 or 4 calls prior to this call. So let's begin. Speak to us about this notion of the Next Billion Ventures. I love the title, by the way, and you often speak about this in the various conference platforms, and you've, of course, written a book around this. Share with us your ideas.
Yeah, I think people think that I'm talking about money, and it's not just about money. I think the greatest, maybe poorly understood tech trend is not the technology itself, but it is that billions of people now have access to supercomputing in their pockets. So it is unleashing billions of customers almost overnight. It's unleashing hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs almost overnight. But we have to keep in mind that maybe 2 billion or more people have no access at all. So there's both opportunity and I think obligation for us as we think about the worlds and the way they're shifting.
Yeah, and that's truly exciting. Do you think, if you look back in the last decade, and you've traveled extensively, I know, from China to India, but also to Jakarta, Cairo, Sao Paulo, to name a few places, and we've met in the Middle East several times. What do you think is the key impetus? Would you believe that it's, for example, if I think of the smartphone, that's given access to people never like never before? What would you say is the rise of this next billion that's driving the spirit of entrepreneurship across the world, particularly in developing markets? Maybe throw some color on that.
So the greatest entrepreneurs I've met anywhere in the world, of course, come from markets like this because they've been naturally entrepreneurs. From Africa to Southeast Asia to Latin America, most people have multiple side hacks. They're always trying to navigate different ways to build revenue and to work around infrastructure problems. So it's a natural unleashing that is happening because of technology. And I think you're right, smart devices, supercomputers certainly has played a role of it, but now you can get access to almost the most basic tools on artificial intelligence. And most of the great entrepreneurs, like the two you just had on, they're sitting on massive unique data sets. And if you have that, which is the hardest thing to do, now having access to AI tools and machine learning is really at your fingertips in a way they weren't a few years ago. So that will be a compounding factor in how these companies perform.
Historically, or perhaps more traditional thinking is that if I'm a startup in Jakarta and I'm thinking to raise venture funding, the default go-to idea is to go to Silicon Valley, set up a company down there, and start hustling and raise funds. Would you agree with the idea that maybe that's changed? And what's not accessible in the past, i.e. capital and knowledge, today is equally available everywhere in the world in terms of access. Yeah. So how would you best describe that given your travels and observation?
I think you phrased it really beautifully overall. I mean, this has been a trend that's been happening for a while. And I think for the first time, accelerated by COVID, much of Silicon Valley is beginning to understand that talent not only is everywhere, which they did understand, but the talent wants to stay home. They want to be in their own markets and understand their own markets on their terms. And if they have lacking talent in one market, you can certainly find it virtually in others. And so even we have to be in Silicon Valley or 50 miles within Sand Hill Road, investor friends of mine are saying we've got to think about the world in a very different way. And on top of that, there's been a rise of capital in every one of these markets, which has been astounding. I mean, you can make an argument there's not enough yet, particularly somewhere in the middle. Typically, there's often a lot of seed and angel investing and a fair amount of kind of late stage investing once a company's proven itself. And there's been a gap in between. But I've seen in many markets that gap is filling rapidly as there's more wealth created. New generations are taking over family offices. Very strong venture capital funds have had great success in their first fund, so they're raising more capital in their next funds. And that's a good flywheel and cycle to look. And all of this will feed itself, I think, to have a much more almost new globalism approach to how companies raise money and who is looking to invest in them.
I think you hit a couple of interesting points around funding. If I look at, say, the Middle East per se, just last year we reached the $1 billion mark in terms of total funds invested. A lot of it actually is coming through backed by sovereign wealth funds. Putting back capital into the region through VCs. Homegrown VCs that set up down there, but the participation of family offices too, as you said, led by the next generation, who want to see an impact version of the narrative, which means just not investing in successful companies, but how can they impact employment within their own cities, in their backyards? How can they impact the ecosystem by bringing on board new talent, which could then create spin-offs of tech hubs, for example. And all this leads me to think about that globally speaking, you're looking at a series of nodes, right? Tech nodes that's emerging around the world that is kind of interrelated or interdependent for success, as opposed to having one major hub, which is, say, the Valley. And what would you predict, I guess, looking for the next 10 years, the evolution of innovation? Where will innovation come from? Put it this way.
Look, I think part of the answer is in what we mean by innovation. I think for a long time, and particularly in Silicon Valley, we think of innovation as a bright, shiny new thing that revolutionizes everything. And I think we've already seen that some of this is now coming from China and other parts of the world. But I think there's a broader definition of innovation, which is, if you have never had a bank account before, if you never had access to credit other than going to your family or some loan shark somewhere near you overall, the ability to be credit scored almost instantly because of data on your phone, from it could be a Grab or a Kareem or what have you, or it could be a startup doing it purely overall. That is innovation. It's a revolution of behaviors from which other innovations will build. And then secondly, there are enormous opportunities and problems within rising markets the West doesn't focus on at all. I've leaned quite deeply in the Next Billion Ventures. We've leaned in to B2B marketplaces. 50 to 90% of all retail is done through mom and pop shops who are completely fragmented, often have no access to technology. The ability to bring them together as a market, that's a massive innovation that is often not on the framework of the West. And to me, you're just going to see more and more things rising on their own terms. And eventually, absolutely, we're going to be seeing great innovation coming from other places that has that more global element to it. I mean, nobody thought 20 years ago that Taiwan would be a hub of chip manufacturing and chip innovation. I mean, these things just happen, over time as success breeds success.
When you mentioned about China and success there, it's taken China about 30 years to lift about 600 million people of poverty. And that's through the industrialization of the country. But if you think about financial inclusion in countries like the African continent, the Middle East, what do you think would be the key drivers for the next wave of 600 to a billion people that will be part of this financial inclusion conversation?
Well, I think that the demand and the hunger for financial inclusion couldn't be greater. So there is an arguable that, as we say in the venture world, the TAM is enormous and the desire is enormous. I think one of the beautiful things about financial inclusion is that everybody wins, right? Maybe the old school traditional financing institutions may not win as much, though frankly, often they focus on the top 20% of the economy and do just well. And so the competition is, in fact, bringing in these new billions of customers, as we referred to before. But I think the world now is looking at China and saying, if there are 700, 800 million people who are moving money on WeChat or Alipay, and this has completely allowed them to have access to credit in a way that the old style kind of credit scoring was almost impossible. We have the data, we have the behaviors, we know it can happen here. I mean, remember, before China became the largest mobile payment country on earth, the largest mobile payment country on earth was Kenya. I mean, M-Pesa and the ability just to move money with text, let alone with an app, was a revolution there. And it's going to happen, I think, everywhere overall. But one of the big questions is, will governments really lean into it? Because governments are a beneficiary of financial inclusion too, whether it's tax collection or keeping corruption down or other things, which can be very important. And one of the things to watch very carefully is what companies or countries are sort of leaning in to allow new regulation on this innovation's terms, what are really trying to push people to move to mobile money, What the countries are going to be able to embrace innovation, sandboxes, and then really allowing companies to spread out in powerful ways. When you see that happening in combination with the talent and skill bottom up, it's almost like watching the sun set in the west. We know how that will play out.
That's a fantastic what do you call description of what we can anticipate coming in the coming decade. Christopher, just last word on your investment thesis. What are you investing on today? What excites you? Any tips that you could share?
I do like these, what I'll refer to as kind of hands dirty businesses, meaning that you have to understand the ground. You have to stand local on its own terms. You can't sort of fantasize that you just show up with software and everyone will adopt it. You really understand that local nuance and you understand the depth of the problem. And once you do, you can layer on technology to scale it, to take care of the data insight that you can bring to bear going forward. So I do like things like the business B2B marketplaces. There are a lot of things I'm seeing now in small business. Credit, which I think are revolutions in and of themselves. And all these spaces, not only do I think could be quite large in being responsive to my investors, but I think they change the world. I mean, I think the two folks that you had on before me are changing their worlds. They're making people's lives substantially better in ways that there's no going back once they succeed. And that for me, and I know it's true for you, Vijay, is really one of the big reasons why we do this.
Well, Christopher, that's music to my ears. And I think, where I sit on the platform at Techstars, we're investing in early stage companies and we're looking for opportunities in emerging markets far more than ever before. And like the two examples before you with Cedric, Three Wheels United, and Abhinav with Pax Credits, two companies we actually have invested in already. That's really the excitement that we see, particularly in the financial services sector. Christopher, in closing comments, I know that we kind of ran out of time. I'd love to end the show with this, a gift first moment. So share with us a moment that maybe, by the way, I should preface by saying you've been extremely generous. And I've observed you over the last decade. You've been extremely generous with your time, mentoring people, giving time back for advising, so on. And I'd like to ask you, for the sake of the audience, what is your gift first moment where someone has offered a random act of kindness that has left an imprint on you?
Well, thank you for saying that about me. To the degree that's true about me, it's in part because I've had thousands of such moments. I don't think a day passes where I'm not stunned by the generosity of an entrepreneur or a mentor or someone in my life who just out of nowhere does something. And every so often it can be a stranger. So one that jumped out to me is that you may recall was kind of a legend in helping to found angel investing in Silicon Valley, Ron Conway. Ron just was, he just was this way. He just helped every entrepreneur he could almost randomly. He became a friend over time, but I didn't know him when I had a major problem in a company that I was running. And a friend had just said, talk to him because he's a wise guy. And so we did. He was incredibly wise. And in 24 hours, he had made connections for me to solve my problem in ways that I just wasn't able to do it, even in my own relationships. He was not an investor. He never asked me for anything. And it struck me dramatically. And I think I've lived my life that way before him. But I think about him regularly in the way that I work with people around me. 90% of my Zooms early in the morning are not people that I've invested in or probably will invest in. They're just incredible talent that is trying to get there. And I've been there. I feel the pain of it. I know the excitement of it. And I think that all of us are here this way too, Vijay, in spades. So that's just what it's about. The alternative is just not acceptable.
Christopher, you've been an inspiration. Thank you for your generosity and time. And thank you for being here on the show. Really enjoyed speaking to you, as always. And wish you very best. And by the way, we should take an offline conversation about some mutually exciting opportunities to invest with. Take a great day. That's it. We have had Christopher Schroeder of the Next Billion Ventures, who's joined us, speaking about his perspectives on the emerging markets and the next billion in terms of opportunity. We also spoke to Cedric Tendong, the Chief Executive Officer of Three Wheels United, who's based in India, solving the electric mobility space, but having a great social impact, lifting people out of poverty through doubling their incomes. We also spoke to the CEO of Pax Credit, Abhinav Balagoni, who is trying to reduce the costs and friction for sending students abroad for studies with this cross-border payment technology. That's it, folks. See you next week. Stay safe.